Hello. So thank you for joining me. My name is Di from Wild Harvest School of Self-Reliance. Today we're going to be talking about permaculture. It's actually a huge subject, so we're just going to look at a couple of concepts today, a couple of takeaways. So the word permaculture actually comes from two separate words. It comes from permanent and it comes from agriculture. So it's the idea is that it's permanent agriculture. It's sustainable land management. It's the idea that we can live with a piece of land and keep getting a yield from it, and with a reciprocal relationship, so that over time we don't exhaust the resources. So it's sustainable agriculture, permanent agriculture. Now it's not a new concept, it's a newish word. It was coined in about 1978 from Bill Mollinson and David Holmgren. However, although the word is quite new, we've been doing permaculture for hundreds of thousands of years. Our ancestors would have had to learn to have a reciprocal relationship with the land, because if they didn't understand the land and the messages it was giving them, they would go hungry. It could cause famine. So they had to learn to observe the landscape around them and modify their behaviour as to how they were going to grow things to maximise the chances of success. It was a kind of grow or die situation. So my version of permaculture, how I like to define it, there's so many different definitions of permaculture. I like to think of it as kind of modelling nature's own gardening methods. So observing how she gardens, observing your garden first, and then observing how nature gardens within that, and modelling her methods. So that's what we're going to talk about today. So the first thing I want to talk to you about is observation. It's very easy when you get given a piece of land to tuck straight in. People are excited, they've got an allotment, a garden, and they just want to start planting it out. However, it's really important that you actually learn to observe the land. Now, we've lost touch with the ability to learn to observe the land. We've lost the ability to read the landscape, and there's messages like our ancestors could. So what I'm going to do today is give you some tools how to observe your land, because it's a big mistake to get a piece of land and plant it straight out. You have to observe it, and you actually have to observe it for a whole year through all of its seasons. And these are the things that I'm going to talk to you about, the things to look for before you plant a single plant. I teach observation methods in my full day permaculture, and what I ask the students to do, I say to them, I give them a very vague instruction. I say, right, take your pen and paper, go out onto the land and spend 5 minutes observing, and then come and feed back what you saw. And this is deliberately vague, and I see this look of panic on their faces. They're thinking, oh God, what are we observing? How do we observe? And it's not our fault. We haven't been taught how to observe land, how to kind of survey the landscape and read the messages out there. It's just not part of our education. So I keep it deliberately vague, so I let them go out and they kind of walk about the land, and then we come back and I give them some tools for observation, and then they go back out, because basically there's a lot of data out there, and that data is really useful once you start managing a piece of land. If you try to work without understanding what naturally is there already, then you can have a lot of labour, a lot of financial input, and it just won't work, because at the end of the day, Mother Nature is greater than everything. And if you don't kind of observe the things that are going on there, and you try to work against her, it's just not going to work. So some observation tools then. When you go out into your garden, what I want you to do after this, go out into your garden and look for the following things. You might want a pen and paper, because there's quite a lot. Firstly, look to see which way is north, south, east and west. So try to work out where the kind of predominantly sunny areas would be in your garden, where the sun would rise, where the sun will be in winter, where will be the sunniest place in your garden in summer. Because every garden has a microclimate, lots of microclimates within it. So you need to learn to work with the microclimates in your garden. So sun is the first thing. So observe where the sunniest spots are in your garden. Observe where the wind enters your plot. So the predominant wind, as we know, is southwesterly in our country. But obviously in your plot, it could actually be funneled by buildings or by a valley. So try to work out where the wind enters your plot and which direction. because obviously if you're then trying to grow things that are quite tender or fragile, you need to know exactly where the wind is funneled, where it comes from. So you need to know where the sun is, you need to know where the wind is. And the third thing is any frost pockets that might form in your garden. So if there's kind of, if the land falls away or if there's little hollows, in winter you can get frost pockets. And if you haven't observed for the full year and you don't know that, you might try and plant something in there that just doesn't work. So you could save yourself a lot of time. So we've got wind, frost, sun, and the other thing of course is any damp boggy areas. So walk around your land, look for damp boggy areas, and you're basically going to make what you call a base map of your garden, not a design that comes in the future. You need to know what you have now so you can work with that for maximum gardening success. So the other thing we've got shade as well. Where's the shadiest area in your garden? Note that down. And you might say to me, how do I know all these things? How will I know where the sunniest part is, where the boggy bit is? Well, we've got something called indicator plants. It's especially true of soil type, because soil type is another thing that you want to be looking at, putting on your base plan. So go around your garden, try and find the different soil types in different areas and note that as well. So have you got clay soil in one area, sandy soil here? And in my book I tell you how to do different kinds of soil tests, because you really need to know what you're working with before you put a plant in the ground. So how would you know about all these different things? Well, we've got indicator plants. So if you look at a piece of land and you can work out what is growing there, you've got a good idea of what is happening in the soil with the weather. So indicator plants could be things like with the soil. If you see nettles, then you know you've got fertile soil. If you see pineapple weed and plantain together, you know that your soil is compacted. So for example, you wouldn't want anything that needed a loose soil structure. Other indicator plants, for the sun, if you look at foxgloves, they will send out their bells to the sunny side. So by learning to read the plants in the landscape, you can tell what is going on in your plot so that you're not fighting it when you then come to plant plants. The other thing to note on with your observations is the water flow. So where does the water enter your land? This could be a stream if you're lucky enough to have a big plot, but equally it could be a downpipe off a roof going into a water butt. It could be a cracked piece of gutter. Where is water entering your plot? And then you ask, where is water pooling, collecting in your plot? And then finally, where does the water exit? Because in permaculture, there's a lot about working with existing water flows. It's all about making things easy, making it easy for plants to grow naturally. So note on with your observations, where does the water enter, collect, and exit your land? So the other thing to think about is the permanence of any features that are there. So when you're observing, so you don't need to note down the wheelbarrow, because obviously that's got no degree of permanence. But if there was a rock face or an oak tree or a concrete building, you would want to note that in your observation, because they're things that you can't remove to start designing. So then the other things to note, of course, is size. What kind of area are you working with? Obviously, if you've got a small garden, you can measure that with just a tape measure. But if you've got a large plot, how do you go about measuring? Because don't forget, measurement is a form of observation. It's quantifying what you've got. So to measure, one of the things we learn in permaculture is how to, say, pace out a large piece of land. I know, for example, that my paces are 68 paces for 100 metres. So I could walk around a farm and work out how big a field is. So you want to kind of make a note of the size, perimeter and area as well. So all these observations, the reason we do that is because it's a little bit like, I call it catalogue down gardening. Most mainstream gardeners do what you call catalogue down gardening. So kind of, they get the catalogue, they look in it and they think, oh, I want these plants, I want my garden to look like that. It's a bit like going into a hairdresser's with a picture of Beyonce and saying, I want to look like that. And the hairdresser's thinking, I can only work with what I've got. And it's exactly like that with gardening. You have your gardening catalogue, but you have to work with what you've got. And that's why it's so important to observe how nature is operating already in your garden. Because if you don't do that and you go against it, she will win and it won't work. So that's the difference between somebody who's green-fingered and not, is that they have learned what conditions the plants need and that they can just put the right plant in the right place, basically. So observation then, you need to collect data about the land first and foremost before you start before you buy a single plant, and you're going to put all of this onto a base map. So that's the first thing I want to get you to look at your land with new eyes, okay? To observe it, looking at all of these things. Look for indicator plants, look for wind direction, look for where frost pockets might be, where does water flow, so that you can utilise that. And then the second thing I wanted to talk to you about today was, so that's kind of how to work with nature, but the second thing is how to garden like nature, okay? So how to garden working with nature, but now we're going to look at how nature gardens, because if we actually observe Mother Nature, I mean, we know she's the best gardener of all, because she's constantly providing this huge bounty without any input from man. And how she can be constantly providing this big bounty of plants is because a few things really, but the first thing is she operates on what you call a closed loop system. So if we model some of nature's methods and how she gardens, then we can bring those into our own garden to make things work, to make things grow more easily. So a closed loop system. Mainstream gardening often is a linear system. So it starts with going to B&Q on a Sunday morning, buying lots of plants and soil that has been transported there on lorries. Then you drive it home, then you do things in your garden and you make waste, and that waste goes in the bin with household waste, which is all transported to a rubbish dump. So that's a linear system. Permaculture tries to get us to use all the resources only that are on our land and just keep reusing them. If anybody's been blackberry picking, which I've got a feeling that a lot of you will, if you've ever been blackberry picking on the edge of a wood, you'll have taken part in that closed loop system. Because when nobody's ever been out to water the blackberries, to weed them, to feed them, they manage to have a high yield because of this closed loop system that Mother Nature operates by. So for example, the leaves fall and they cover the soil. And then underneath that you've got the worms that are aerating the soil. They're causing the water and the air to get to the roots. They're adding nutrients to the soil, and then the plant grows, produces fruit, and then it drops the seed in this highly nourished soil, and it all starts again. So Mother Nature operates on a closed loop system. She never goes to B&Q on a Sunday morning. So we need to kind of model those methods, and any waste output from our gardening system, so it's about kind of making compost, putting the compost on your land. It's about emulating that closed loop system in your own garden. So trying to have a closed loop system and not a linear system. The other thing, if you ever notice how Mother Nature gardens, she never has bare soil. So one of the things that I hate to see is if you go into the council parks and you'll see a team of workmen, kind of 5 workmen, clearing a bed so that it's just down to brown soil, and they might have 2021 written in pansies in the middle. That's a heck of a lot of labour, a heck of a lot of herbicides and pesticides to just keep bare soil. So Mother Nature doesn't work like that. She will always have the ground covered with something, whether it's ground cover of plants or leaf litter. So another thing to model in your own garden is always have the soil covered. So there's a few ways you can do that. You can have a living green cover, like I like to bring herb Robert back from the woods, and I've just got that growing everywhere. Or you can just put cardboard or straw. But the reason that is good is because it prevents evaporation of nutrients and oxidization of nutrients. It just creates a better kind of habitat, and it holds water. So Mother Nature knows that, and that's why she never has bare soil. So you could emulate that. So the other thing that how nature gardens is she gardens in lots of different layers. If you think of a formal garden, like if you go to posh gardens in a country house, often they're just 2 layers. It's the grass, and then you've got a very posh topiary hedge going around. So that's just 2 layers. And often a lot of housing estate gardens are like that. It's just 2 layers. But Mother Nature, if you stopped cutting that grass, what would happen? Well, first you'd get tall weeds, then you would get small shrubs. Mother Nature actually gardens in 7 to 9 different layers. So again, if we kind of let a little bit of wild in, we can do that. And the reason she does that is because 1 square metre then, if you have all these different layers going on, the output of that 1 square metre is so much more than if it was just 2-dimensional. So if you think in terms of, you've got the undersoil layer, so you've got kind of roots and so you've got the root layer, and then you've got the moss layer, the grass layer, and you've got small shrubs, big shrubs, small trees, large trees, and then she has things growing that connect all those different layers together. So try to incorporate lots of different layers of height into your garden, so to kind of garden like nature does. The other thing that she does is the type of plants that you find in the wild are not the type of plants that you would get from B&Q on a Sunday morning. Seed sellers tend to sell, I don't know if anybody knows the difference between a self-terminating seed. So when we do that linear system that I talked about, you buy the seeds, you plant them, and then next year you also have to buy seeds again, because the seeds, when they create new plants, they don't grow true to type, and that's because the manufacturers have modified those seeds. They're called sterile, they're called self-terminating, or they're called F1. And obviously the reason that the seed makers do that is because they want you to go back to the start of that linear system to have to buy more seeds. Obviously nature doesn't work like that. So when she drops seeds, when her self-seeding annuals will grow true to type. So always try to buy heritage seeds, so that when you plant them, they will either grow more and more year upon year, so you don't have to keep replacing them, or you save those seeds and put them in an envelope, and then you can do it again next year. And best of that is then you can seed swap with friends as well. So always make sure that you're getting heritage, proper seeds, not the modern F1 type. Another thing how nature gardens is that she uses a lot of perennials. So if people like to grow their own veg, they know how labour intensive it is if you're just doing annuals. But the good thing about permaculture is part of the diversity thing is that you can mix up lots of types of plants. Over here I've got like brassicas growing amongst primulas. So the idea is that you can have lots of different plants growing together, but particularly use perennial plants. Perennial plants, we say in permaculture, that you just plant them once and then you can forget about them, but year upon year they keep giving. So they're called creep in the first year. That means that they just grow really slowly, and then the second year they leap, they kind of grow a bit more, and then the third year you reap. So it's a kind of plant once plant. So again, Mother Nature, she gardens with self-seeding annuals that grow true to type, and she gardens with perennials, meaning that she doesn't have to keep planting anew every year. So we said no bare soil, diversity, encourage diversity, different heights. This closed loop system we're trying to emulate. But the other thing also is biological pest control. Obviously Mother Nature, she doesn't go and buy pesticides and herbicides, and similarly you can have a pond, for example, or free range runner ducks, so you can utilise biological controls as a low-cost, natural way of managing your landscape. The main thing is really right plant, right place, because if you go back to the observation part, if you have the wrong conditions for a plant wants to grow, it's in its nature to grow, but if you haven't created the right conditions for it, it won't grow. So if you think of a woodland, all the plants that are there, they're the right plants for the situation. So if in your garden, there's a really good example of lilies and pineapples. We know they don't belong in England, and they're very what you call high input, low output plants. So try to choose plants that are right for the things that you have observed on your land. Otherwise, you'll have a lot of input just trying to keep that plant alive. The idea of pineapples as being a perfect example of a high input, low output plant is it's actually carved in woodwork all around our country. If you've ever seen pineapples carved in woodwork, the reason that is because it's an incredible sign of wealth if you can have a high input, low output gardening system. Only rich people could do that. If you could afford to keep a whole underground cave of young boys keeping fires going so that you could grow pineapples, then when you turned up at a party with one pineapple, people literally bowed because they realised the energy input into that one pineapple. Peasants, on the other hand, had to become masters of low input, high output gardening systems. And that's how nature works. So try not to work against nature if you want to make gardening easy. So the permaculture is such a massive subject, and we've just touched on a couple of things today. So kind of how to work with nature by observing your land first, so you make the right decisions. And secondly, how to work like nature. So kind of modelling some of her methods of gardening and trying to bring those onto your own plot. So there's so much more to talk to you about with permaculture. I do run a day course. Also in my book there's about 20 pages on permaculture, and it talks about things like how to do soil tests. It talks about, it's got a space in there for you to do your own garden plan. It talks about even how to measure contours on land. So if you wanted to work out the slope on a land, how to create an A-frame out of hazel poles and walk it around a hillside so that you can plot contours. So basically, how to become a land surveyor, you need to become a surveyor of land. And when I say that, I'm not talking about huge fields, even your garden or your balcony. If you can learn to observe what is going on there, it just means that you're gardening, you're more likely to have gardening success. So start by really observing, and then also incorporate some of nature's own methods. If you've got any questions about permaculture, please, because it's such a big topic, just comment afterwards. Let me know what size plot you've got. Have you got a tiny little yard? Have you got a whole farm? Because permaculture can be applied from tiny yard size up to farm scale and even community level. So yeah, let me know in the comments below kind of what size plot you've got and what would you like to do with it. And remember, do not buy plants until you've observed. All right, take care and thank you for joining me. Bye.